le malattie mitocondriali nella ERN-NMD. Adesso col fatto che ci sono queste reti europee, e fra quelle neuromuscolari un sottogruppo è le malattie mitocondriali, che è coordinato da Rita Horvath, e speriamo che questa collaborazione fra i vari centri europei porti qualcosa veramente di utile anche per noi. Sono coinvolti anche le associazioni, quindi speriamo. Grazie. Di Cambridge.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation, and I will try to present you some work which has been done within the so-called European Reference Network for Rare Neuromuscular Diseases. So, the European reference networks are virtual networks involving healthcare providers across Europe, and they aim to tackle complex or rare diseases and conditions that require highly specialized treatment and the concentration of knowledge and resources. That's the definition of ERNs, and they were started in March 2017. So there is more than 2 years experience now in these networks. So within the European Reference Network for Rare Neuromuscular Diseases, there are 61 so-called healthcare providers. You can see them in the map. And then you can see that Italy is very well represented in this network. And this is for all neuromuscular diseases, and for mitochondrial diseases, quite a lot of these centers have expertise. So this is just the structure of the ERN neuromuscular diseases, and you can see that there are 5 disease groups: muscle disease, peripheral nerve diseases, neuromuscular junction defects, mitochondrial diseases, and motor neuron diseases, which are represented within this ERN. And there are cross-cutting specialist groups who are deciding or discussing about the best neuromuscular imaging techniques, neurophysiology, neuropathology, and genetics. And also there is a large patient advisory board, and the patient representatives are leading the ethics committee. There is a research board, and the educational board, and the clinical governance group, and this is all coordinated by the executive board and the coordinator. So the coordinator of the ERN-NMD is Teresina Evangelista, and the coordination was in Newcastle for 2 years, and from 1st of March it was changed for the Institute of Myology to Paris. So the first 2 years was focusing on developing some research activities within the ERN, starting to develop guidelines, outcome measures, some communication and networking within the teams, and also organizing clinical training and education. And there is an online platform, the so-called Clinical Patient Management System, which should be used to discuss patients within the ERN, but it has a lot of issues and problems, and some countries are not allowed to use it for legal reasons, so there is a lot of discussion about it, but it has to be further developed, and because this would enable the across countries the discussions about the patients. So there is one meeting per year where all issues within the ERN are discussed, and the last meeting was in November in Prague. And at this meeting, within the mitochondrial group, there were a few issues which were discussed that would be useful to develop some work on. The first one is to organize mitochondrial conferences for clinicians, scientists, patient representatives across different ERNs, because mitochondrial diseases are not only represented in the neuromuscular ERN, but also in the metabolic ERN, in the eye ERN, and also in many other ERNs because it's a multi-system disease. There were discussions about starting mitochondrial international registry, developing mitochondrial guidelines. It may be useful to develop a platform for data sharing in mitochondrial disease, and also there are some initiatives already to develop education and training courses, which happened just this year. In Nice there was a training course, there will be another one in Paris later on this year, and they started to do webinars on interesting topics in different neuromuscular diseases which people can listen to. And they are also stored online. So, about the registry. So, Thomas Klopstock and Holger Prokisch are initiating an international mitochondrial patient registry together with Michelangelo Mancuso and others from Italy, and Bobby McFarland from the UK, and also Michio Hirano and the representatives of the mitochondrial diseases from the US. And recently the French also want to join, and they would like to achieve that more countries are joining to this international registry, and it is currently under development. And also Holger mentioned yesterday that there are many new techniques, omics technology, which will go into the diagnosis of some mitochondrial diseases which cannot be diagnosed easily on the DNA level, and there would be also useful to have some international collaboration on these techniques and develop some data sharing. In the research, from January 2019, there is a new 5-year program started in the EU. This is called European Joint Program on Rare Diseases, and this is containing several aspects of research on rare diseases, and launched already some funding schemes. There was already a call in January, which was the previous ERR, but it's a similar call to apply for grants on collaborative research across EU countries. And there is a call which is coming out now to develop registries, and also there will be further calls, hopefully, to help to organize conferences and education in rare neuromuscular or rare genetic disease, and mitochondrial disease will be one of these rare inherited diseases. There is one large research project which also started in January 2018 already. This is called SOLVE-RD, and the aim of this research is to solve the diagnosis of the patients with rare genetic diseases who could not have been diagnosed with exome sequencing previously. So they are the centers who are participating in this initiative. And they are in the first stage, they are trying to collect unsolved exomes, existing exomes of 19,000 patients with rare inherited diseases. In the second stage, they are collecting special cohorts of patients with rare, ultra-rare or unsolvable diseases, and these will be newly sequenced with different new technologies. And there are 4 ERNs which are the core group of this research project, and the ERN-NMD is one of these 4 ERNs. But there are many other ERNs and existing rare disease infrastructures and patient organizations which are also part of this project. The genetic data platform is on RD Connect, which has been developed in an earlier EU-funded project to integrate clinical and genetic data of patients with rare disease. And on this platform, the clinicians have an active role because they see the patient, they send the sample for sequencing, the data are submitted to the European Genome Analysis platform and then to the RD Connect platform, and in parallel the clinicians also have to submit the phenotyping data to the platform. And after the data are all in the platform, they can analyze their data themselves. And this is relatively easy. This is just to show this is the way how the clinicians can analyze their own data. And what I know from my experience that I have in my lab a pediatric neurologist from Hungary who never did anything with rare genetic diseases, and after a 4-hour session she is perfectly able to analyze data on this platform, and in the last 2 months she has analyzed 200 families with this very after this very short training and quite well. So this is just, it's very complicated because there are also, the consent forms has to be made unique in the platform, the standards of the data has to be discussed, so it's quite a lot of work behind this platform. And there is one new thing what is coming up, that there are some rare diseases where there is a treatment possible, and it would be good to point out these diseases early in the diagnosis, because the patients have the exomes, it may take several months to get the result, and even the result is not getting directly to the clinician, and there are issues why the treatments cannot be started early in the diagnosis, and the project called Treatabolum would highlight treatable causes and would enable early treatment of patients. And it's just to illustrate that this is still a long process to identify which one is the pathogenic mutation. And in a case study, we tried this platform in 50 families from consanguineous Turkish families, and these families were selected by Dr. Semra Hisz, who is a pediatric neurologist in Izmir, and Yavuz Oktay is a scientist in Izmir who was helping Semra in this project. So 193 individuals, exome data were submitted to the platform, and the clinicians in Turkey added also the phenotypic data of these patients. So after the analysis, we identified the molecular cause in 31 out of 50 families, and the diagnostic rate in the different disease groups was different, but from the 50 families, 3 had a treatable disease course, and it is highlighting that it's important to have this diagnosis early. And the first project on the Treatabolum was done in another disease, in congenital myasthenic syndromes, and it required a systematic review of the literature, which genes or which mutations have a specific treatments, and then it has to be implemented in the platform. It's also important how much phenotype do we need for these patients. So in this study, Rachel Thompson analyzed how many HPO terms are the best to find a molecular diagnosis, and it seems that if we have between 5 and 7 HPO terms, it is quite good, and even if we have more than that, the diagnostic rate won't increase. So, how to implement it in the genetic platform? We have to identify these variants easily, and this is the platform, and the aim is that if there is a variant which is pathogenic, the button would highlight immediately the potential treatment for this disease. And this project is organized by Giselle Bon and Antonio Atalay at the Institute of Myology in Paris. And at the moment there is only, these data are only available for congenital myasthenic syndromes, and anybody who is interested to develop Treatabolum for different diseases, also different groups of mitochondrial diseases, are very welcome. So just very briefly about some changes in the development of clinical trials in mitochondrial disease. So in 2017 there were just 2 handful full clinical trials available on mitochondrial disease, but now on the clinical trials Gov site, 223 clinical studies are listed for mitochondrial disease. 53 are actively recruiting clinical trials, 99 are completed trials, and the results are only available for 21, so we have to publish this data probably more actively. And many of these studies are natural history studies or registries, but there are increasing number of clinical trials with drugs. And so it's a question how to organize the clinical trials for mitochondrial disease for this many upcoming trials. So within the ERN there is a platform for clinical trial sites, the CTSR, which is not involving mitochondrial disease but other neuromuscular diseases. And there are so many, 352 registered sites worldwide. Within the ERN-NMD, there are quite a lot of sites, but some of the important sites are not registered at this website, and this is the number of sites are increasing, and also rare neurodegenerative diseases are added, and the number of patients is also increasing, but it's not including mitochondrial disease. And the question is whether for mitochondrial disease we may be better off establishing something else, or this platform could be also used to register trial sites. And what are the ongoing trials for mitochondrial disease? Quite a lot of the trials are trying to increase mitochondrial biogenesis. We tried one trial with bezafibrate, and many trials are in planning with substrates like nicotinamide riboside. That was the study what we have done in Newcastle with Patrick Chinnery, and Hannah Steele was the clinical fellow who conducted the trial with bezafibrate in 3-4-3 myopathy, and the study is completed and we are currently writing up the results, so hopefully it will be published soon. There's another trial with nicotinamide riboside, what Patrick Chinnery is running in Cambridge. I will just mention the trials which are not represented at this conference, because many of the mitochondrial depletion trials were represented. Grania was also talking about some studies in Newcastle, and I won't talk about those. Jan Smelting is developing some new drugs for mitochondrial disease with a company, and it is a very long process because they have to do all the toxicity studies in volunteers and then also in patients. They have already performed some smaller study, and it's going on to larger studies. It's very important to develop outcome measures, and also in Nijmegen there was a lot of work done together with other international centers involved in finding the best outcome measures for clinical trials. And Grania has been talking already about the frequent problem with the bowels in mitochondrial disease, and she is running one study which is actually studying diet in mitochondrial disease, and she is also running, soon will launch another study with a substrate which would aim to increase mitochondrial biogenesis. And there are not only drug trials, there are also other studies, like this one run by Bobby McFarland in Newcastle, to assess the development following mitochondrial donation, which is also an upcoming issue. And there are also new ideas for now in mouse models, but they are also going forward soon to clinical trials, like the hypoxia was increasing the life of some mouse models with mitochondrial disease. And currently in Cambridge there will be a trial which is assessing the effect of oxygen in patients with mitochondrial disease. And also Michael Minzuk, who will talk later on, in mice showed that gene editing can also change the heteroplasmy rate of mitochondrial DNA mutations. And Grania is also involved in a very important project which is involving patients into the development of the clinical trials and the recommendation of drug uses. And this project is an international project, and it is running for another year, and yeah, she can tell you more about it. And that there are meetings, like 2 years ago there was also Mitocon supporting a meeting to develop outcome measures for mitochondrial disease. And so there has been a lot developing for the clinical trial side, and I will just briefly mention some other aspects because I think the time is we are over the time. That the interaction of the neuromuscular disease ERN in mitochondrial disease, it has to be very active with other ERNs because mitochondrial diseases affect many different organs. And the metabolic ERN, what is Enrico Bertini from Italy is very heavily involved with, has also a lot of mitochondrial patients, and we are trying to collaborate with the metabolic ERN on mitochondrial diseases. And Enrico and some others who are in the room are also involved in a project to develop diagnosis and treatment for patients with Leigh syndrome. he may talk about it later on, so I don't want to mention it too long. And last, I want to mention that the Mitochondrial Medicine Society in the US is also interested to develop more communications with the Europeans, and if there is a, like for example in the registry, they want to participate in international registry, so there is a lot of ongoing collaboration with the American Mitochondrial Medicine Society, which is good to have it worldwide in mitochondrial disease. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you Rita, thank you very much. Penso che il progetto del tritabolom è importante, è molto importante, perché ne parlavamo anche prima, cioè anche identificare delle mutazioni che sono, delle varianti che sono più soggette a un trattamento specifico è molto importante. The variant, the tritabolom project with this variant that maybe are more easable target with specific drugs, I think is very important. And c'è anche spiegato tutti i progetti anche di collaborazione che sono in corso a livello delle European Reference Network neuromuscolari. Ci sono domande? Non domande? Ok, so I hope this collaboration will give some fruit, I mean some products, okay.